welcome to Movieception Show. My name is Fariba, and today I'll be doing my movie review on Avatar: The Way of Water. So before I go right down into this film, I just wanted to give my general opinions about Avatar, just because I feel like this is very necessary to just explain how I feel about this film and just how I was going into the theater and leading up to just my expectations of it. And I know that when it comes to the Avatar series, there's people who really dislike it. There's people who really love it. I feel like there's a couple people who are in the middle. For me, I'm kind of in the part of the spectrum where I'm not a fan of the first Avatar film, the 2009 film. Um, I'm not a big fan of it. I mean, yeah, visually it's great. It's a really visually beautiful film that revolutionized 3D and just kind of the spectrum of what we know of, of cinematography and visual effects itself today. I mean, if it wasn't for Avatar, we wouldn't be seeing movies like, Endgame or whatnot, right? Or like, these films, like whether it be Mad Max Fury Road or something like that. Like, we wouldn't be getting these films if it wasn't for the way that Cameron revolutionized visual effects and how we kind of see that in the big screen today. I think that's one thing I can credit for Avatar and the way he did it, especially because it was 2009, right? So, um, I will give that, but in terms of just the movie itself, I feel like it's just nothing new. It's nothing different. I think the way I always described Avatar as a movie is that it's basically Pocahontas, but with blue people. It's literally a film about colonialism, but also doing it in a way that's kind of a bit inaccurate, or like doing it in a way it's just sort of becomes a white savior complex. And I think that's where I kind of have issues with the first film, that it does a lot of that, where it's like, okay, well, we have the Navi people, and of course you have Earthlings, basically foreigners from a different planet, who have now, invaded in a sense of this different planet where we have the natives, again Pocahontas, and then eventually at some point in the film, one of the Navi characters falls in love with, somebody who's actually technically a foreigner, but embodies a Navi from like their science and all that sort of stuff. And it just kind of felt like that. Like, that's kind of how I feel about this film. It's basically Pocahontas, but with blue people, and that's really what this film kind of envisions in a way that it kind of gives me a lot of problems with it, because again, the inaccuracy of that we've seen with films like this, the way it tries to not really glorify, but kind of mislead in terms of like, or misdirect in sort of things that historically have happened in terms of colonialism and the way that the colonizers have oppressed the natives. Like, I think there are some things that do work, there's some things that don't work. And again, I think for the most part, I just wasn't fascinated by the film. And I just felt like, again, it was just, again, Pocahontas with blue people. That's all I think. That's all I ever describe Avatar. And I think that's where I always have this problem with it. Just kind of just how it decides to envision it. Sort of like, it could have gone any other different direction in terms of like trying to allude to the whole colonial aspect, or colonization or colonialism of this film. Like, I mean, that's a big part of what this film is about, like colonialism, and how you have oppressors like the Earthlings kind of, coming in and destroying sort of the nature and and just everything that is just like part of the nature of Pandora, and how they're ruining that for their own benefit. And I think that that is a very important message to, to manifest in the film. But I think in a way, in doing so, where it's like they're having this romance, like I wasn't really a big fan of it. I think that's kind of where I kind of was like a bit, underwhelmed, and as well as kind of off put with like the whole narrative of that. And that's why when it comes to Avatar, I'm in that end where I'm just not a fan of it. I don't totally hate it. I wouldn't just be like, oh, like Avatar sucks, blah blah blah. I mean, I think if you were to ask a lot of people about Avatar, and ask them who the characters are, people will forget their names. And I think that's true, and I think that's a big issue of like why I think that Avatar is somewhat overrated, just because, yeah, it has the great visual effects, but the story isn't the most, original, as you can say. So that's why I wasn't a big fan of 2009 Avatar film. And of course, in these 13 years, or yeah, 13 years, like, everyone has been waiting to see when the sequel is going to come out, because I mean, not just think, but we all knew that there was going to be sequels. That has been, that has been the headline for so many years. Like, we always see James Cameron come out of nowhere and be like, hey, we're going to make the sequel. We're just going to make this second sequel, but we're going to also make Avatar 3, Avatar 4, and even Avatar 5. And it's like, okay, whoa, like, that's great that you are thinking about Avatar 3 and 4, but you haven't even released 2 yet. And there was just a lot of discussions about this. I remember this kind of just being this big, this big wait for a lot of the Avatar fans for the last over this over a decade. Just like, when is Avatar 2 going to come out? And Avatar finally came out this year, finally, after like 13 years. And yeah, I mean, for me, it was just like I was gonna go in as just a casual watcher, just like kind of, comparing it, just not just comparing it, but just seeing how things have changed. Because again, like, we are dealing with technology that is different from 2000. Like, today we're dealing with different technology, of course, and I think that was one of the reasons why I believe Cameron has discussed about it. The film's delayed because some of the technology wasn't there yet, and it wasn't there yet until recently. And I think that, okay, well, that does make sense in some ways, and I guess that's why it took such a long time to make The Way of Water. But now we have it, and it's like, okay, well, what does this mean? How does this compare to the first film, and what does this mean in terms of just like the whole overarching, universe of the Avatar world or Pandora world, right? So yeah, I did see Avatar: The Way of Water. I actually saw it the first night it was out in theaters. So a couple weeks ago, I've actually seen this, and I went to go take it with my friend Marilyn, but she of course didn't see the first one. She just basically slept. So it was just me watching the film, and of course, like, another 3 hour film that you have to deal with. I think it's even longer than the first one by like 30 minutes or so. So definitely a lot to take in. But yeah, again, I think when we go into this film, right, I think that one of the things I was just wondering is like how much they're going to focus on Jake and Neytiri, and just kind of how, like, what are they going to do in terms of just trying to progress, and how they're going to try to advance the story from the first film. Like, again, I wasn't a big fan of the first film, so it's like, okay, well, I'm already kind of going to this film with such low expectations, and so it's like, okay, how will this lead up to, right? And the movie is, it's basically very focused on the, because I think in the first one we focused more so on the sky and the land, and whereas the sequel, it focuses on a whole different dimension of the Pandora world, which is basically the water aspect, right? I mean, that's basically why it's called The Way of Water. And so in this film, in terms of just how I feel about it, I think that I definitely enjoyed this one a lot more than the first one, which is really weird because I know there's a lot of criticism going on with this film and how some people prefer the first one. I myself prefer this one over the first one. And I think a lot of it's just because there is a bit more of that family aspect in terms of the story. So yeah, in this film we do see Jake and Neytiri again, and this time they do have a grown family. So they have two sons, a daughter, and then they have adopted daughter, which is Kiri, who is actually the daughter of Grace from the first film, the one played by Sigourney Weaver. She's also playing her again in this film as a teenager, which is insane, which I'll talk about in a second. But we do see much more of a family value aspect of this film. I think that that's where I think this film really does kind of improve a bit from the first one, just because I think family is a big part of, like, whatever, because I think when it comes to just like a film, like, or just kind of like the overarching themes of Avatar, like when you do have things like colonialism and just this oppression, like family becomes a big part of it, right? Because like, you're dealing with a whole tribe of people who are very tight knit, and seeing how they're being affected by, people like the oppressors, and how there are people who are trying to destroy their planet or their nature and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's a big part. I think the big part is always going to be the family aspect. So it's nice seeing that we do have this much more grown family that becomes a big focus of this film, rather than just like focusing on Jake and Neytiri and this romance. But yeah, in this film, yeah, I think one of the things I will mention with this film is that I think when we get to the water aspects, it definitely, one of the things I'll say is that the visuals are definitely unique, I guess. I think that when I saw this film, you can definitely say that the visuals have really just amped up a notch in some ways that I guess I would say are a bit scary. I think parts of the visual effects, in trying to show this more realism, especially with the 3D aspects, I think that for this film, I did see it in 3D, and I think that I think it's worth watching the film in 3D, just because, again, the whole appeal of this film is just showing this realism, trying to go and immerse yourself into the world of Pandora. And I think that this film really amps it up with the visual effects. Like, it feels really realistic. But I think that one of my criticism in terms of that it's just that when it does try to be a bit more realistic in the visual effects, some of the visual effects looks really like video game-ish, that it makes it too real. And I think that's really weird to describe it. I think I mean, it doesn't take away the fact that the cinematography and the technical stuff is amazing in this film. I mean, I think that's where Cameron really just peaks at in terms of like showing the visionary masterpiece of of anything you're seeing, right? Like the experience of the visual experience is what he really is top notch with, and I think that he really does replicate this in this film. The the effects are really top notch. They're really amazing. There there are even parts of the film where it just seems so real again. Like I felt like it does seem like some parts were a bit video gameish, so I think that's kind of where I felt a bit overwhelmed by that sort of technology. And that visual effects just because like it just felt so real, and it's like okay, but some of it being so real just felt a bit very video gameish, and it's just like okay, well that kind of messed up my mind a little bit, and so that doesn't take away the fact that this visual effects of this film is amazing. I think that again, this is a movie worth seeing in 3D and in IMAX. 3D IMAX if you haven't seen it. I saw it in 3D IMAX, and I think that was probably the perfect way to view this film. I don't know if there's any way to really replicate that experience of it, but the visual effects itself was just amazing to see. Aside from just a little, nitpicky stuff, like again, some of the things looked really video game-ish, but other than that, like I mean, the cinematography, the cinematography, just kind of like seeing the water world of Pandora was just beautiful. Like I think I've never seen something so beautiful like that ever. I don't even think even Avatar was able to, show something as beautiful as that we saw in this film, The Way of Water. I think that the visual effects and the cinematography are just top notch again. I think the technicals in this film are just again, I mean, it's a masterclass. I think that was the whole point of why Cameron waited so long for this film to come to theaters, because like we needed the actual technology to really enhance those features, and I think the wait and away of just the technical stuff was worth it because they were great. I mean, that there's really no denying that. I think that's where it really is kind of the experience of it all. Like you have to have the enhanced experience. Like it can't just be the story, it also has to be everything, right? Especially like the technical stuff, and that is like the music, the visual effects, the cinematography, the everything like that, the camera work, the editing, everything, right? So I'll give props to James Cameron for really just elevating everything with that and just probably revolutioning another whole new generation of just how we're going to use visual effects in the next few years, I guess. So I think that's one thing to mention about that. In terms of story, I think the story is a lot better. In my opinion, to me, the story is a lot better than the first film because, again, it is very family focused. Surprising enough, this film is not as focused on Jake and Neytiri as a lot of people would have imagined. In the first film, the whole point of the first film was just focusing on Jake, how he is sort of the hero of the story, even though again I have my issues with the white saber complex in that film, knowing that he is the hero, but he's the hero of the film. He's the one who's trying to make up with the Navi people, trying to mesh with them, and then trying to right the wrongs of his own people, and doing so he sides with the Navi instead of like the people he was employed by. And now we kind of see here just like again the effects of what happened in Avatar, how he's now a big target, and not just him but his family is the big target because that's their weakness, right? And the reason why the Navi people even succeeded this far along is because of Jake, because he has the experience, he knows the company very well to know that okay, what their motives are, how they're going to execute some things. He has the military background, he knows them right and left, right? And I think that he's a big asset to the Navi people, which of course the earthlings that come to Pandora are going to be the ones who realizes that well, unless they can get rid of Jake, their own pursuits of taking over and conquering Pandora is not going to succeed as long as Jake is out there to defend the Navi. And that's going to be, I guess that's going to continue on to be a big part of the Avatar series, and just sort of how they're going to continue on with the movies from 3, 4, and 5. But yeah, we see that as a big aspect, and the family part is a big thing. Like we start to see a bit more of the characters and the family. I think this is kind of where and again I'll talk about it in a second actually. So let me just talk about the characters a little bit. So we see again Jake's 2 sons, youngest daughter, and Kiri. And I think there was also a character named Spider. And Spider is actually not really related to them. He's just like, I believe he was like the baby from the first film, and he's like now all grown up, and he's like that character who's like, because he's so different from everybody else that, he is different, but also he tries to be so ingrained with the whole Navi culture that he himself thinks that he is Navi. I guess you can say like the Jungle Book in a sense, with Mowgli and how like how he was raised, something similar to that. I mean, that's probably the worst analogy to use, but that's the only thing that can come up. But that's what it is. But yeah, in terms of the story aspects, again, I mean, again, when it comes to the Avatar series, the stories are not the strongest all the time, and I think that again with this film, like in the first film, I think the first film nothing's really original, so that's why I didn't really enjoy that film. And again, I had a lot of issues with just sort of how the execution was in terms of the colonialism, the white savior complex, and all that sort of stuff. Whereas in this film, I felt like there was definitely a lot better aspects to it, like some of the themes. Like again, I mean, colonialism is still a thing. That's a big part of it, but I think the family aspect is where I think really shines in the story a little bit because again that allows us to really empathize with the character a little bit more. Like I felt like I was able to relate more to them because of this family theme, and that's what allowed me to I actually was a bit more focused on the characters this time around than I was with Avatar. That being said, right, uh in terms of the story itself, again there's a lot of these inconsistencies that I really have to pinpoint. Of course, like this is not the most perfect Avatar filming. I mean, there's gonna be debates about whether Avatar, the first Avatar, is better or Way of Water is gonna be better. A lot of us are going to be debating on that without a doubt. For me personally, I think that this film is a lot better, which I'll go more into in a second. But in terms of the story itself, I think there's still some inconsistencies, like especially with who are like, especially in terms of like the importance of the characters. I think that's a big part I need to really address, because the part that I really need to address is just the inconsistency of the importance of the characters, right? So yeah, I mean, for one thing, Jake and Neytiri, yes, they are in this film, but they're not the central figures that a lot of us would have thought they were going to be. I think this film was more focused on the kids, which is again the two sons, Duke and Kiri. And even with that being the case, like really the focus of this film was really Kiri and Jake's second kid, which I do not remember his name, which I'm telling you, I cannot remember these names. But the second kid, his second oldest kid, or basically his second kid, his second his younger son, because it's just two sons and one daughter, right? So his younger son, or his middle child, is the one that who I felt really had the most spotlight in this film, because a lot of it is revolving on the fact that he is sort of the troublemaker. He is the rebellious son. He's a rebellious, family member who's really causing a lot of troubles in the film. And if it wasn't for him, things wouldn't, go as bad as things would have gone, right? So he was definitely the focus of this film. And I think that he had carried on a lot of screen time, as well as Kiri, who's played by Sigourney Weaver. And oh my god, Sigourney does a great job with playing Kiri, because I don't think a lot of people would have noticed. Because I mean, I knew beforehand that Kiri was going to be played by Weaver, but a lot of people probably didn't know that the character, that the actress who played Grace was going to be the same actress playing Kiri. And I mean, she does such an amazing job. I mean, again, just embodying just this teenage curious Kiri who really wants to learn more about her parentage, and trying to understand her mother, and like really loves her, and just like wishes that she can bond with her birth mother, which she can't, because of course Grace technically died in the first film. And so there's definitely, and I think that I'll talk about more about Kiri in a second in terms of just some of the more plot hole stuff. But yeah, I think that when it comes to this film, I think the stand, of course, is Kiri, and of course the second son, whose name I can't remember. But they were definitely the highlights of this film. I think that Kiri was just a fascinating character to really follow. I think every time you see Kiri, I'm just kind of like, man, I just want to see what else I can see out of her. Like, she seems such an important character, and it's really clear that she is a very important character. We just don't know what it is yet, which we're probably going to see in Avatar 3 or maybe even 4. But she seems like she's going to have a really major impact in terms of the Avatar lore, and how she's going to be a key part of just what's going to happen in terms of this, not revolution, but just sort of this fight against the colonizers and all that sort of stuff, right? So that was just kind of my ideas in terms of the characters. Again, I felt like there was definitely some inconsistencies, because for one thing, while I'm kind of glad that the roles and that the importance of the characters were kind of a bit more shared, because again, it would just be weird not to give the kids their own spotlight and allowing them to really grow. There was definitely some issues with, in terms of just like the importance of the characters, right? So for one thing, Jake's oldest son, like I felt like, as much as the fact that he's supposed to be the oldest son, he didn't really get a lot of screen time, or we just didn't really get to see the depths of him. And I felt like that's really where like things kind of were really hard to really, to really just understand him and just to relate to him. And that kind of leads up to sort of the issues in the ending of the film, where like, after everything that's transpired, like there isn't that emotional weight of like what just happened because of like, this one character. And I feel like because there wasn't that much of this depth of this of like Jake's oldest son, that it was just really hard to really, understand who he is, relate to him, get emotionally invested in him, like the way I was emotionally invested with Kiri. Like I love Kiri, and it's like, man, like I don't want anything bad to happen to Kiri. Whereas it's like I don't understand their oldest son to the point where it's like I wish they could have been a bit more. They could have gone more into his side of the story, but again, it makes sense why, because it seems as if the second son is going to be a bigger character in ways that probably will be a big part of like what's going to happen in Avatar 3, 4, or even 5. But I think even the more biggest issue, I think the bigger issue is the fact that even the main, like the characters, right, the original characters, Jake and Nightiri, I think he had enough screen time for what he needed to really share with the family. I think the issue is more so with Nightiri, because Nightiri just seemed like she was absent in like the whole middle part of this film. Like the moment that they arrived into this into this water tribe, like she just completely went absent. I don't know what happened there, because I kept wondering like, where is Nightiri? Like she is here, right? Like, I'm assuming she's learning, because like one part of this film, the kids are supposed to learn the ways of like the water tribe, right? I don't know what the water tribe names is, but the water tribe, and understanding how to adapting to their new life in this water land, right? And yet we see Jake trying to learn as well, like with the animals that they learn in the water, and we see with the kids how they're trying to how they're trying to learn to breathe on the water and trying to hold their breath for so long, as well as the creatures. But we never see Nightiri, which was like the most baffling thing about this film. I was like, okay, Nightiri is like one of the biggest characters in the first film, and she's supposed to be a big character in this film, and yet she seemed completely absent in the middle part of the film. Like she was here, she appeared in probably the first 20 minutes of the film and probably the last 30 minutes of the film, and that was where I kind of got a big annoyed, because I was like, well, she's supposed to be a big character. Why is she absent? Like I don't know if this had something to do with Saldana's scheduling. Like, did this kind of overlap with her time with shooting for the Guardians or something like that? Maybe that could be it. I don't know. There's a really big issue that caught in this film that I was just kind of like, it really was like, okay, well, again, this is kind of where I'm starting to see sort of this issue and this inconsistency where it's like, yeah, we have this male character who is like the hero, and yet we always kind of sideline the female characters. And that's where again, another issue I always have with Avatar is like, again, it's this inconsistency with some of the characters, especially when it comes to like female characters. All of a sudden they're just sidelined in the sequel for some reason, and I think that was where I got really annoyed with The Way of Water. It's like, okay, Nightiri should have been given more of the screen time, especially because when you get to the end of the film, there's definitely a lot of darkness. There's a lot of sadness that happens, a lot of things happen, a lot of something really truly tragic happens in the film. And it's like you feel for Nightiri, like, because I feel like this film should have taken that journey of Nightiri as not just following Jake as a father, but also Nightiri as a mother. And we do see Jake as a father, but we missed the part where we see Nightiri as a mother, and I feel like that really missed its big part that they never really focused in this film, or Cameron didn't focus in this film because it wasn't there. And the one part where we do see kind of this mother's feeling, because like now when it comes to being a mother, of course, like you're the one who has given birth to these kids, and therefore you're even more connected to your kids in ways that even a father cannot understand. And I feel like we don't really get that until the end of the film, and by then it's just like, okay, but where is this emotional weight that we should have gotten in the middle of the film? And I feel like that was where I really kind of was a bit annoyed. And I feel like I believe that's where a lot of people might be criticizing this film a little bit, because of the way that Nightiri is portrayed in this film, because she's literally absent in the middle of the film. That was just something I wanted to rant about, because it's just like, it was just really baffling how she was just nowhere in the middle of the film, and anytime she does appear, it's just kind of like a quick here and there, aside from the beginning and the end of the film. But yeah, aside from my small rant right there, because I was just like, what happened to Nightiri? But aside from my small rant right there, I mean, again, the world of Pandora, and at least in the water side, it's just beautiful. I think, again, I've said it before with cinematography, they really show the beauty of water. I think even Cameron himself said that the reason why he he made this movie and focused on the water aspect of it is just to kind of convey the importance of like the water, like in general, right? Like ocean, and how the ocean is very important, how we need to be a bit more aware of like the issues that are happening in the water, and how the environment is affecting even the ocean side itself. And I felt like this is a film that really does hit that mark, because as much as the fact that there are some inconsistency with the characters, I do appreciate how they do kind of go into the depths of the water world. Just going into just the world of it. I think the world building, I think it's definitely the best part of this film, trying to go depths into it. I think that was what even the first film really accomplishes very well, which is just going into the world of Pandora, at least in terms of the skies and the lands. And this sequel, it really does a great job in just showing the world building of the water side of it. And I felt like that was kind of where I felt I really enjoyed, just because it does go into just the beauty as well as the dark side of everything that's happening. Especially because again, when you do add in the whole colonialism part of it, it does break your heart. And I think that that's something that Cameron does a really, really great job of, just conveying that message and showing that, okay, this is the waterland, and this is not just happening in this film, but this is an issue that we see in our real world as well. There's definitely one scene where like I literally, like, I mean, as much as the fact that I have an issue with the story itself, there's definitely one sequence in the film where I'm literally just kind of like I'm literally like I my heart just sunk. um I think it involves with like, I believe like this big fish looking species. I can't remember their names, but they mention these names a lot and I don't even remember. This is what I mean, I can't remember everything. But I think a lot of you may, if you've seen the movie, you'll know the one scene I'm talking about, which is like regarding about the fish, like this whole like species of like well looking types of, you know, species and Pandora, and how there's this one sequence where we see kind of these, I guess, mercenaries or smugglers or something like that, where they're literally all they do is kind of kill off these like these specific species because they hold something like really valuable and very like expensive that, you know, gives them money, like millions of dollars of money. And it's like the part leading up to that, like just seeing just kind of this whole sequence where it's like, wow, like after everything that we learned about just this one species right here, like it definitely makes your heart sink knowing the consequences of like what's happening in the water, and how people like the smugglers and how people like, you know, mercenaries are, you know, don't give a crap about them. And I think that that really sunk my heart. I think that was probably the one part where I just felt like, oh my god, like that really got me. Just like I was silent, I was quiet, I was just I felt really upset. I think that was probably where I felt like this was probably the one part of the film that I truly started to kind of get really invested into the film, just because of how I started to really express my emotions about what was going on. I think that was, of course, what Cameron intended to do, is just to really show just the depths of what's going on in the ocean, going on in at least in the water side of Pandora, and just showing like, okay, this is a consequence of colonialism. This is what colonialism is doing, or not just colonialism, but in this case, just kind of like how people are taking advantage of things just for their own greed, and how this is affecting sort of this whole world. This, at least in the ocean side, that it definitely it definitely makes you like a bit more eye opened about what's going on. It makes you a bit more aware of what's going on. And I feel like with that one sequence, I start to be a bit more appreciative of what this film was trying to do. Again, like I remember reading an interview from Cameron, how he discussed about how this film is supposed to kind of, you know, show the realities, illustrate the realities of what's going on in the ocean, and therefore hope that as us as a population of the human population will be a bit more aware of, you know, trying to be careful with the ocean, try to be, you know, be more environmental about it. And I think that this movie does a great job of doing that, at least just showing, just again, aside from all the beauty, here's kind of the issues that we're dealing with environmentally. And I feel like that was really good push that I think Cameron does a great job of, especially because this happens in like in the middle endish early final act of the film. And again, I felt like, at least considering the fact that, again, this is a film that really had some pacing issues, and I'll discuss more of that in a second, but considering the fact that this film does have a pacing issue, I think that in some ways, in the way that it paced throughout, showing the world building of this water side, that it does at least kind of allow you to understand, like, okay, this is the consequences of it, and it definitely gets you kind of a bit upset in some ways, where it's like, wow, this is what's happening. Like, I can't even tolerate that. Like, that's wrong, right? But yeah, going into sort of like the pacing of it, like, again, I think with this film, it takes, because it is a 3 hour film, it takes so much time in the first act trying to show the world building of the water side of Pandora, right? I think a lot of people like me were understanding, like, first half was definitely like too long in terms of in trying to explore the water side of Pandora. Again, I don't remember all these names, so I can't remember the tribe or anything like that, but I'm going to keep on saying water side of Pandora. And the water side of Pandora, yeah, it's beautiful, and it's really just like just seeing kind of how the world building is there. It's just amazing. But it doesn't so in a way that there isn't really anything going on, and it takes like, I think it takes up like a good chunk of the time just like exploring the world rather than just like going right into the story, which I think there are pros and cons to. I think it did work. Like, the fact that I did take time to go into world building, it does allow us to like understand the beauty of it, trying to immerse ourselves into like this world, understand what it is, how it works, and I think that that was okay. But of course, like, when it goes too much in lengths of like discussing that, showing that, it does kind of a bit too, like, it doesn't, it makes a movie a bit too long, but also it kind of like, okay, we want to also go right into the story, right? Like, what's the purpose of doing all this, and why are we going so deep into it? I think, again, there's like, it could go either way. I think that it kind of goes into the idea of like, what do you think really worked in this film? And I think that, again, because it goes so much, it dives too much into the whole aspect of, okay, we're gonna go do the world diving, that by putting so much emphasis on that, it does take away, again, a lot of the consistency that I wish could have been fixed in terms of like some of the characters. Like, again, I mentioned Naitiri just being downgraded as a character, this, well, eldest son kind of like not having so much depth into his character. Another thing like that felt like really forced, or just kind of, it just wasn't really organic. It wasn't really organically incorporated into the film, was like the villain and a scorpion spider, and how alluded that they're biologically related. I think that's the whole aspect of it. I can't remember Stephen Lang's character. Again, I don't remember all these characters, but Stephen Lang's character, again, he's back. He's back, but it's like a different version of him. Like, it's a DNA clone of his Navi self. I think that's what it is. Again, really weird stuff going on. So again, it just shows that he's still sort of a big problem of the story, and how he is still a big source of what's going on and all that sort of stuff, and how he's connecting everything from the first film to this film, which I guess it's necessary, but also it's kind of like, okay, like, he didn't really contribute much into the story other than just hunting Jake, and even then, like, all of that hunting Jake stuff wasn't really a big part until like more so the end of the film. Like, again, there's a lot of pacing issues with this film, where it's just like, you have like the really long exploration of the water tribe and just the water itself, and how it does get a bit too much into just the whole exploration of it, and not going right into the story of it. And again, like, that kind of affects the whole aspect of the characters themselves, and like the actual arc, and everything like that, like the plot and the subplot and everything like that. And by the time we do get to the end of the film, I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess like it just becomes a bit more generic ending, where it's like, okay, well, we're going to have this typical fight scene, and someone's going to die. And I mean, I had a feeling someone's going to die, and I felt like it's going to be somebody from Jake's family. Spoiler alert. But yeah, I had a feeling that's going to happen. Which I felt like was going to be the oldest kid itself, because I felt like the amount of allusion to kind of just this dynamic between the characters, it just you kind of get this idea that, okay, someone's going to die, and it happens, and that ends up becoming the case either way. And that is what happens anyway. So, and even with that, like, I feel like by the end of the film, like, some of the things, like, I guess there was some satisfying stuff, and things just were a bit underwhelming. The final act really was just kind of like, okay, some things were cool, some things weren't. And I think that they even, I think when it comes to Cameron and just executing the final act and like the conclusion of the film, it does kind of go a bit too much in terms of the runtime. Like, you would think that it has ended from this point on, only to see that there's still another part of this act to go and deal with. and it's like, okay, let's just end it off. And I think that's where, again, we're seeing a lot of issues with the length of this film. This film could have been at least 20-30 minutes shorter, whether it be removing some of the world building and going right into the story, or the end of the film where I just felt like it just kept going on and on with like the ending without really, without, finally getting to its end point. And it's like, okay, it was just dragging in some areas where it's like it could have just been a lot better if you just removed a lot of stuff and just put in things that were actually relevant, that were really important, without ruining the pacing of it, and then still kind of narrating the story off from point A to point B. So yeah, I think that was just kind of my issues with this film as well. I mean, again, this is not a perfect film without a doubt, but also, in my opinion, Avatar is not a perfect film either. I mean, that for me, Avatar is far from a good film. I think that in case with this one, this was definitely a better film. I think the sequel is a lot better than the first film, just because, again, there were things that it does fix, whether it be just the family story, swaying away from just the typical, Jake and Neytiri romance and focusing more on the family stuff. I think the one thing, again, I'll compliment is the visual effects are great, and I think that the actual message about about the water world and just the ocean itself, and just trying to be a bit more aware of it. I think James Cameron really nails it and really kind of gets us to be a bit more attentive about it. I felt like I was really attentive about those parts, and I think that was a big part that I think Cameron really accomplished. But aside from that, I think there were definitely some inconsistencies with the plot, the characters, where I think, again, they were just all over the place. Their importance, their significance were just kind of jumping around. Neytiri was basically absent in the middle of the film. Even the villain wasn't as formidable as I would have wanted to be, even though they tried to kind of force it upon it. I just didn't feel like they really did much. Again, like a lot of the things that should have worked well together just didn't it wasn't done immaculately. I mean, I guess it's just again, it's just going into more of like, it's just a masterfully visually, I guess you can say, is that this, at least with the sequel, is visually beautiful film, and when it comes to technical stuff, it's a masterpiece. But when it comes to the actual story itself, again, it's just another generic story that is just being replicated here, and not really doing much to make it really special, aside from a few things, like, again, the ocean part. I feel like that was probably one of the few things that I literally was paying attention. I felt like was some of the highlights of this film. Again, the one aspect where, like, the one part with the whole fish with the mercenaries and all that, that really pissed me off. I feel like that one was something that, again, I felt like that was definitely a big part of this film. But even with the ending, like, it wasn't as it wasn't an original ending. Like, it just felt like an ending that you probably would have seen like in 10 different films as well. But aside from that, again, I think, and then this is a film that I at least enjoyed a lot more in terms of what it tried to do, especially because it is a 3-hour film. If I were to give it like a rating for, I'll probably give it like a 3.5, because it is, again, the visuals are great. Some of the characters are very interesting, especially Kiri. I really wonder what they're gonna do with her character in Avatar 3 again. Like, there's definitely something going on with her. I felt like the story was a lot better, especially with the family theme of it, as well as like the message about the ocean part. But again, like, some of the more issues are sort of like the actual story itself, where it just, some of the characters, again, just seemed absent, just wasn't really put together as well as I would have wanted it to be. Again, like, some characters were very important, some characters were not, some characters were absent, some characters just didn't really fit into the story as well as should have been. But I think that hopefully after this, maybe Avatar 3 will kind of, I mean, of course, we're going to probably see Avatar 3 kind of build up from what happened in Avatar 2, because I think this film is really critical for what's going to happen in 3, 4, and 5, because of everything that's happened with the family and everything like that. And yeah, I think, and there's something, again, some things I have a lot of questions about, like, why haven't we, like literally early in the film, they addressed the fact that Kiri might have, I believe, like she has like epilepsies and seizures and all that sort of stuff, and they don't really address it again later in the film. They just mention it, but they don't address it. So I wonder what that means. Maybe they'll hopefully address in the third film, maybe, who knows. There was definitely a lot of things that they kind of just mentioned but then never really addressed again later in the film. So hopefully we'll see more of that in some of the future films. But yeah, again, there's a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of things that just worked didn't work. Things were going way too long, dragged too long, especially the ending, especially and the opening parts of like the Water Tribe and everything like that. But regardless, I did enjoy this one a lot more than the first one. But yeah, that's all I have to say about Avatar: The Way of Water. Let me know what you think. Have you seen Avatar 2? I'm assuming you have because a lot of people are watching it. It's breaking records, and I believe it's already past $1 billion. So I'm assuming you've probably seen it. What are your thoughts about it? How do you think about it in comparison to the first film? What do you think works? What do you think do not work? Do you agree with some of my opinions about this? Are you also a bit mixed about it, or do you have more positive feedback about it? What do you think is going to happen in Avatar 3, having seen what has happened in Avatar 2, and what are your thoughts in general about Avatar: The Way of Water? Let me know in the comments down below, and make sure to like and subscribe.